The sun was sinking low over the wide Texas plains, painting the sky in strokes of orange and deep crimson. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as a lone rider appeared on the horizon. His hat was tilted just enough to shadow his eyes, and the faint jingle of spurs echoed with every step of his horse. This was no ordinary traveler. This was a cowboy with a reputation. Some knew him as Jesse Blackthorn. Others just called him the Drifter. Wherever he went, whispers of trouble followed. The town he rode into was called Dry Creek, a place that lived and breathed by its saloon and its sheriff. Wooden storefronts lined the main street, with faded signs creaking in the breeze. Folks glanced up from their daily routines as the cowboy passed, curiosity mingling with suspicion. Outsiders were always noticed here, and Jesse was no exception. Jesse dismounted slowly, tying his horse near the saloon. He pushed through the swinging doors, where the piano player barely missed a note at the sight of him. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and secrets. Men played cards at worn tables, while women in bright dresses laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. But Jesse's eyes weren't on the whiskey or the cards. They were fixed on the woman pouring drinks behind the counter. She was striking, auburn hair tied back loosely, a sharp wit in her smile, and a confidence that stood out in a town where most women kept their heads down. This was Claire, the sheriff's wife. Everyone knew it, but Jesse didn't seem to care. The way he looked at her wasn't just casual interest. It was dangerous curiosity. Clara noticed it too. She tilted her head, sizing him up. "Don't think I've seen you round here before," she said, sliding a glass toward him. Her tone was cool, but there was a spark in her eyes. "First time in Dry Creek," Jesse replied, his voice low and easy. "Looks like I came to the right place." Their eyes locked for a moment too long, the kind of moment that could stir rumors faster than wildfire in tall grass. The saloon seemed to buzz with quiet tension, as the other patrons pretended not to notice. Everyone knew Sheriff Holden was a hard man, protective of his wife and unforgiving of those who crossed him. But Jesse leaned in anyway, resting his elbow on the counter. "Maybe you can tell me what's worth sticking around for in this town," he drawled, his smile carrying more charm than was wise. Clara arched an eyebrow. "That depends, stranger. Some things here are off limits. Best you remember that." Jesse chuckled softly, sipping his drink. Off limits only made things more tempting. And outside, the sheriff's star glinted in the fading sunlight. The days in Dry Creek seemed quiet on the surface, but underneath, whispers began to spread. Ever since Jesse Blackthorn had walked into the saloon and locked eyes with Clara, folks couldn't help but notice the spark. In a small town like this, every glance, every smile, turned into a rumor faster than a bullet leaves a gun. Jesse returned to the saloon the very next evening. He wasn't the kind of man to ignore temptation, especially when it came in the form of a woman like Clara. She stood behind the counter as always, her auburn hair catching the glow of the lanterns. When she saw him walk through the doors, a faint smirk touched her lips, though she quickly masked it beneath the routine of pouring drinks. "Back again, stranger?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes daring him to say more. Jesse leaned against the bar, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Reckon I couldn't stay away. Something about this place keeps pulling me back." Clara tilted her head slightly. This place, or the company? Their exchange was subtle, but charged with meaning. The piano played softly in the corner. Men laughed at their card games, yet to Jesse and Clara, the rest of the saloon seemed to fade away. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. Jesse showed up, always finding a seat close to the bar. Clara served him drinks, each time with a touch more familiarity, a glance that lingered just a second longer. They spoke in half-whispers, in little teases and jokes that no one else needed to hear. Still, not everyone was blind. A ranch hand named Miller, drunk on whiskey, muttered one evening, "Careful there, cowboy. That's the sheriff's wife you're flirting with." Jesse didn't flinch. He just smiled faintly, finishing his drink. "Appreciate the advice," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "But I don't scare easy." Miller chuckled nervously and turned back to his cards. But the warning hung in the air. Clara caught Jesse's gaze again, this time more serious. "He's not wrong," she murmured. "My husband Holden, he's not a forgiving man." Jesse leaned closer, his words slow and deliberate. "I met unforgiving men before. Still standing here, ain't I?" For a brief moment, Clara allowed herself to smile, though it quickly faded. She knew this was dangerous, reckless, even. But something about Jesse's presence stirred something in her she hadn't felt in years. The attraction between them wasn't just playful anymore. It was becoming something neither of them could ignore. And in Dry Creek, where secrets never stayed buried, it was only a matter of time before someone carried their story straight to the sheriff. Outside, the desert wind howled through the empty streets, as though warning them both of the storm that was bound to come. The sheriff of Dry Creek was a man who carried authority like a second skin. Holden was broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes that could cut through lies quicker than a blade. His presence alone could quiet a rowdy saloon without him ever reaching for his revolver. Folks said he'd tamed Dry Creek through fear and iron discipline, and he guarded both his town and his wife with equal fierceness. It didn't take long for Holden to hear the whispers. This was a small town. Secrets were impossible to keep. By the third night, word of Clara's glances and the drifter's boldness reached his ears. Holden didn't act right away. He wasn't a man to jump at shadows. But when Jesse stepped out of the saloon into the dusty evening air, he found the sheriff waiting in the street. "Blackthorn." The sheriff's voice was steady like gravel rolling over stone. "We need to talk." Jesse stopped, his hand brushing near the edge of his gun belt. Though he didn't draw, he studied Holden for a long moment before answering. "Sheriff, don't reckon we've been introduced proper." "You've been introduced plenty," Holden replied coldly. "You've introduced yourself to my town, to my saloon, and to my wife." The words hung heavy in the evening air. A few townsfolk loitered nearby, pretending to go about their business, but clearly watching the exchange. Jesse smirked slightly, though his eyes stayed sharp. "Friendly conversation over a glass of whiskey ain't much of a crime, last I heard." Holden stepped closer, his boots grinding in the dirt. "Listen to me, son. I'd seen your type ride through before. Trouble follows you like a shadow, and I won't have it here. My wife is not for entertaining, and if you've got an ounce of sense, you'll keep your distance." For a moment, Jesse considered his words. The sheriff was deadly serious, and every line on his face told a story of men who hadn't heeded his warnings. Still, Jesse wasn't the kind of man who turned tail at the first sign of danger. "I hear you," Jesse said slowly, tipping his hat. "But you see, Sheriff, I make my own choices. Always have." Holden's eyes narrowed. "Then make this one wisely. Leave Clara alone, or the next time we talk, it won't be with words." The two men locked eyes, the tension crackling like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Finally, Holden turned and walked away, but the warning lingered like a loaded gun between them. Jesse watched him go, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He respected strength, but he also loved testing its limits, and Clara Holden was a limit he was more than willing to cross. Above them, the desert sky grew darker, stars pricking through the vast emptiness. A storm was brewing in Dry Creek, and both men knew it was only a matter of time before it broke. Night in Dry Creek was a different kind of quiet. The heat of the day gave way to a cool breeze that carried the faint smell of sage and dust. Lanterns burned low in the windows, and the streets lay empty, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the rattle of shutters in the wind. It was the kind of stillness where even the softest footsteps could feel like thunder. Jesse Blackthorn moved like a shadow, his boots silent on the dirt road. He wasn't headed to the saloon this time. He was headed to the back of the general store, where the alley was narrow and hidden from most of the town. "That's where she said to meet him." Clara appeared a few minutes later, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her face half hidden beneath the brim of a bonnet. To anyone else, she would have looked like a woman out for a late errand, but Jesse knew better. When she stepped into the shadows, he tipped his hat, his grin just visible in the moonlight. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I came," Clara replied softly. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled just enough for Jesse to notice. "You're reckless, Jesse. Holden suspects already. If he knew I was here, he don't." Jesse cut her off gently, stepping closer. "And even if he did, worth the risk." Their eyes locked, the same dangerous connection that had sparked in the saloon now burning hotter in the dark. For a moment, Clara's fear gave way to something else, desire she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Jesse reached out, his calloused hand brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. "You should walk away," Clara said, though the conviction in her voice was fading fast. "Leave town before this gets you killed. And leave you here. Not a chance," Jesse replied. His voice was low, rough with sincerity. The alley was silent but alive with their breathing, the nearness of two people who knew what they were doing was wrong but couldn't stop themselves. Jesse leaned in, and their lips finally met, a kiss charged with all the tension they'd been holding back. But passion in Dry Creek was never truly private. A shadow shifted at the far end of the alley. Someone had been watching. The figure lingered only a moment before disappearing into the night. Neither Jesse nor Clara noticed they were too lost in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "This can't last," she whispered, though her voice sounded more like a plea than a warning. Jesse touched the brim of his hat and gave her that dangerous half-smile. "Maybe not, but tonight it does." The desert wind carried their secret away, but not far enough. In a town like Dry Creek, nothing stayed hidden forever. The next morning, Dry Creek streets were deceptively calm. The sun rose pale and hot, glinting off the wooden rooftops and turning the dust into a shimmering haze. Inside the saloon, the day began like any other. Cards shuffled, whiskey poured, piano notes struggling to break through the hum of conversation. But beneath the routine, tension lingered like smoke. Clara thought the night had ended safely. She had returned home before sunrise, brushing off the thrill and danger as if it were a dream. But Jesse, stubborn and unrelenting, had lingered until the early hours, and that alone was enough to set fate into motion. Sheriff Holden had not slept. The whispers, the shadow glimpsed in the alley, the gossip, he pieced it together faster than most men would. And now, he was on his way to the saloon. Boots heavy, star gleaming in the morning light. Jesse and Clara met once more in the back room of the saloon, believing themselves alone. Their whispered words and stolen touches were interrupted by a sudden crash. The door flew open, and there he stood, Holden, eyes blazing, hands hovering over his gun. "Step away from her," he growled, voice low but carrying a dangerous weight. "Now." Jesse turned slowly, his calm facade slipping for the first time. "Sheriff, I didn't." "You didn't what?" Holden's voice cracked like a whip. "Flirt with my wife behind my back. Sneak around like a coward. You're damn lucky I don't draw first." Clara stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Holden, please." "No, Clara, this ends now." His hand twitched near his revolver, and the air between the three of them seemed to freeze. Every patron in the saloon pretended not to notice, but their hearts thumped in time with the tension. Jesse held up his hands slowly, deliberately, showing he meant no sudden harm. "I didn't come here for trouble," he said. "I respect you, Sheriff, but I also don't hide from what I want." Holden's jaw tightened. "Respect? There's no respect in this. You play with fire, Blackthorn, and one day it's gonna burn you to ashes. Step back or I swear I won't be lenient." Clara's eyes flicked between the two men, torn. "Holden, you have to understand." "I understand plenty," he interrupted, voice low and cold. "I understand that some lines are not to be crossed, and you, Jesse, just stepped over the wrong one." For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in that standoff. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, floating like tiny witnesses. Jesse's grin returned, faint and dangerous. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but some lines are worth crossing." Holden's hand twitched again, the star on his chest glinting menacingly. Clara's pulse raced, and outside, the wind carried the promise of an inevitable confrontation that none of them could escape. The sun had barely risen over Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the empty main street. The town held its breath, as if it knew the storm it had been waiting for had finally arrived. Jesse Blackthorne stood in the middle of the street, hat tilted low, hand hovering near his revolver. His eyes scanned the windows and doors, noting every shadow, every potential witness. At the other end, Sheriff Holden appeared, his boots kicking up dust with each step. His star glinted sharply in the morning light, his hand steady on the grip of his gun. The wind carried the weight of unspoken threats, tension thicker than the desert air. Townsfolk peeked cautiously from behind curtains and shutters, hearts racing. "You've pushed your luck far enough, Blackthorne," Holden called, voice echoing across the street. "This ends now." Jesse tipped his hat slightly, a faint grin playing on his lips. "Maybe so, but some things are worth fighting for." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then, with a sudden, fluid motion, they both drew. The sharp crack of gunfire split the morning, echoing off wooden walls. Dust swirled as bullets tore through the air, sparks of flying grit catching the sunlight. But the duel was more than a simple contest of speed. It was a battle of will. Jesse ducked behind a barrel, firing back with calculated precision. Holden's shots rang true, but Jesse's instincts and quick reflexes kept him one step ahead. The town felt frozen, caught in the deadly rhythm of the gunslingers. From the saloon doorway, Clara watched, heart pounding. She knew the stakes, she knew what either outcome could mean. Fear battled desire inside her as she whispered a silent prayer, hoping for more than survival, for a chance at freedom from fear, from the life that bound her to Holden. Suddenly, a stray shot shattered a lantern, plunging part of the street into shadow. Jesse seized the moment, rolling forward and leveling his revolver. He didn't aim to kill, he aimed to force Holden to the edge, to show that some lines, once crossed, could not be undone. Holden froze for a split second, eyes meeting Jesse's, with unyielding resolve. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his gun. Silence fell over Dry Creek like a heavy blanket. Jesse's grin widened. "Guess we're even," he said, dusting himself off. Clara rushed into the street, relief flooding her face. "It's over," she whispered, embracing Jesse. The sheriff stayed at the far end, chest heaving, star glinting, a man beaten not by bullets but by choice. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that some battles are fought not with guns, but with courage and restraint. As Jesse and Clara disappeared into the distance, hand in hand, the town slowly returned to life. Dry Creek would remember this day not just for the duel, but for the love, danger, and defiance that had rewritten its story for